Hello, my name's Michael Salmony, and I'd like to welcome you to another episode where we talk to interesting people around digital finance and fintech. And today I'm really happy to meet with Zennon, who knows all about Asia. And he said something very remarkable to me recently about the super apps. I'd always thought super apps were the big thing in Asia, but you've said maybe that's the wrong way of looking at it.
Yeah, thank you, Michael, first of all, for having me here. It's great to be chatting with you. And so, briefly on my background, which kind of sets the stage for what super apps are. I started off my career at Citibank, worked in Europe for a number of years, and then came over to China with Intel in 2004. Now, in 2004, when you were trying to pay your rent, you'd have to take physical cash from one bank, walk it across the street, and deposit it in another bank. But by the time I left China in 2018, I was paying my staff using WeChat. I was splitting the bill using Alipay, and I was using an investment product from Baidu. And so that idea of a super app really took off in China. And there were a number of reasons why that was possible. And first of all, the legacy financial infrastructure was really not particularly amazing. And then you had these platforms that were tied into an ecosystem. And I think this concept of ecosystem is really important when we look at the kind of spread, or in fact, lack of spread of super apps across the region. Because WeChat came from a social gaming entertainment background, which brought people into that particular ecosystem. So when I was living in China, that was the first app that I opened up every day. On the flip side, Alipay had the e-commerce ecosystem. So Taobao, Tmall were shops that people would go to on a regular basis. And so that stickiness of that ecosystem, or that kind of killer app that they started off with on the Tencent side, with WeChat being around, again, social gaming, and then with Alipay e-commerce, really created these amazingly sticky platforms. And so this idea of a super app was born because they started off with those basic strengths, and then they built financial services on top of that. And so then over the next
Oh,
couple of years, you saw every
that,
app in
that's a
Southeast
very good
Asia trying to
story.
be a super app as well.
So, Zennon, and I think you hear similar stories in other parts of Asia, like Gojek, I think, in Indonesia, which started off as a food delivery platform and grew from there. And that's why we in the West have been looking at these super apps for a while and wondering, why don't we get some super apps? This seems to be doing so incredibly well across Asia. But you're telling me this is actually on the decline. Is that right?
Well, it's not necessarily on the decline. It's just never really started. I mean, you mentioned Gojek. You could talk about Grab in the same breath. Fundamentally, these apps, if you're a merchant, certainly on one of those apps. So if you're a food delivery driver or a ride hailing driver, then you'd be using them every day. But for me, or for the average individual, you use it around lunchtime. You might use it for the drive home or when you're going to a meeting, but it's not a super app insofar that it's not really sticky from that perspective. And I think that's one of the challenges, is that in other markets, these companies haven't come with that particular sticky value proposition that's kept people in the app and keep people coming every day. And that's really, for me, what defines a super app is, first of all, the range of functions within the app, and then the stickiness that the app has, such that you're using it on a regular basis.
But aren't a lot of these super apps incredibly sticky? I mean, I hear things about Alipay and about WeChat Pay that the Chinese never leave that app. Regardless of whether they make a hotel booking, whether they shop, whether they do their finances, it's incredibly sticky. Why are you saying it's not worked and not being sticky?
I think those are the only, in my mind, there are probably 3 to 4 super apps that we've actually seen. WeChat and Alipay, as you rightly said, are two of those. Those are, by any measure, and those were the original definers of what a super app was, right? And then you have Kakao Pay in Korea, and Kakao is kind of a similar dynamic, where they started from social and then they built additional financial products and services around that. But outside of those three, it's really difficult to point any that is a truly super app. And although many, Grab and Gojek, they like to call themselves super apps, but really that stickiness isn't there, that use case isn't there. So we've seen this shift away from this focus on super apps more towards embedded finance.
Are you saying that is true only for these ones that didn't reach the stickiness, or are even the real super apps like the Alipay and the WeChat Pay, are they also moving towards embedded finance?
Well, in many ways, the super app is the model of perfect embedded finance, right? Where you have your main functionality is not finance, but you bring people into the ecosystem and then you provide them financial products and services, right? So when you're using Alipay, you're predominantly there to buy e-commerce products, but then they have embedded offers from different divisions within Ant Financial as well as or Ant Group, as well as other companies that offer insurance and investment products and everything else. And similarly with WeChat in that regard.
I hear what you're saying, but I would argue there is a difference between the super app, which is a sort of closed system. It's run by Alipay or WeChat Pay, and they control who gets in and everything. And embedded finance for me is a much more open environment. You plug in various players. You can have several insurance players. You can have several banking providers. It's much more open and much more competitive. That's why I find this assertion of yours, which is super interesting, that sort of the super apps might be going more towards an embedded model, really fascinating.
Well, I think that if you look at WeChat as an example, so WeChat coined the idea of mini apps. And so I guess it was probably around 2016, 2018 that they launched mini apps. And the idea here was that you could be an app developer, you could develop an app and then use the WeChat ecosystem. So you could use the payment functionality, you could use the investment functionality, whatever you wanted on that platform. Now it was gated insofar that similar to the Apple Store, you have to pass a certain number of metrics to be able to be included within that mini app ecosystem. But similarly within embedded finance, I mean, just because the APIs are there, it doesn't mean you can necessarily connect into them without an account. So, I don't think the difference in this case is really that the access element or if it's gated or not gated, because most of these services are gated in some form or another. Even when you look at CDR in customer data right, which is open banking in Australia, there has to be some kind of permissioning from the users to have other entities access their customer data. So there's always going to be some kind of gating there. That you can't kind of think of embedded finance as a free-for-all where anybody can just access anything.
No, that's absolutely fair to say. I mean, I just find it rather heartening because a lot of people have been breaking their heads in Europe to say, how do we get a super app going? And even Elon Musk has been trying to do a super app, and some people say PayPal's been trying to do a super app. But maybe the model embedded finance, which again I think comes more from Europe, is actually the way forward. So it's a very interesting reversal of fortune. But just to be really clear, are you saying that those super successful ones, like the Alipays and the WeChat Pays, are they also going to a more open model as well, a more embedded finance model, or yeah?
Well, given the opportunity, of course, all of these platforms would like to control everything internally, right? So if you can provide the ride hailing, if you can provide the payments, if you can provide the wealth management internally, that allows you to capture more margin around that. But I think I was having a conversation with my wife around super apps. She said, aren't super apps like being cool? And I said, what do you mean with that? And she said, well, you can't say that you're cool. It has to be a third party reference that says, okay, you're a cool person or you're a good person or whatever it is. You can't be self-referential. And when we've seen discussion of super apps with platforms outside of, whether it be Elon Musk or Grab or others saying they're a super app, it's really a third party that has to say that. And I think there's been too much focus on we have to be the next super app rather than thinking about what is the actual value we can provide consumers. And so I think when we look across, especially in Asia, I can comment on more, when we look at across what's happening in embedded finance, there is that focus on how do we provide finance increasingly to the financially excluded by using embedded finance, embedding that into a ride hailing app or embedding that into a chat app or anything else that a person might use on a regular basis. So there's still, of course, companies that are focused on being a super app, but a super app isn't something you can force. It's something that happens. It's due to the market dynamics and it happens over time.
That's a very good insight. Thanks to your wife for that. Also, the dimension of sort of making, helping inclusion using this is, I think, another interesting dimension. We don't have time to delve into that now, but I really want to thank you, Zennon. You've been most enlightening and also really heartening that some of the stuff that we will be chasing in Europe and in the West, because we think we're so behind Asia that maybe Asia is coming around to our model of embedded finance and banking as a service. So that's quite heartening to see from our point of view. So I thank you, Zennon, for being so lucid and so interesting. And I thank you all who watched that episode. I hope you found it as interesting as I did, and hope to see you again at some of the other episodes we have on this channel. Thank you for watching, and thank you, Zennon.
Thank you, Michael.